I'm Hunter Atkins with the Bank of Nashville. Today's speaker for our CEO Cafe is JohnLowry, who is at Lipscomb University's Graduate School of Business. John has practiced law, specializing in healthcare, holds a law degree from Southern Methodist University in Dallas, and was a staff member of the California State Assembly. John's specialty is conflict resolution, a topic that we find very intriguing in today's meltdown economy. The Bank of Nashville has been in business 20 years and is pleased to give the people of Nashville this gift of a lecture by JohnLowry, so stay tuned.
Story from the Bank of Nashville, and y'all have got a real treat for you. JohnLowry spoke this morning, and when people start getting their pens out and paper and taking notes, something's happening, so you got a lot to look forward to. The drive behind this series is our bank is committed to knowing more and more of the Nashville business community and Nashville community at large, and this was our pilot project to start trying to increase that, and we've had some success. And I want to tell y'all something that happened this morning. I don't know if any of y'all have like daughters that are teenagers or whatever. You know, they can really lift you up. You're struggling, you come home and they give you a hug. And my son never did that. And your daughters can tell you, you know, I love you, Daddy, and all that. So this morning I got ready to come, and my wife said, Elizabeth, put a note in your pocket. And I was trying to think, you know, I love you, Daddy. Have a great day. Hope it goes off well. Well, I got the note and it said, can you put $25 in my checking account? I don't know if that's an experience that y'all have. You know, whenever you get too high, they have that great leveling ability. So if you don't have teenagers, you will get the experience. We originally did one CEO Cafe as a test drive. We were going to try one, and if it went okay, we did the second. This is our 11th. And it's been put together by a consortium of Jim Fuller, Jim, and Jim will come back and do the Q&A later. You'll see how good he is with people and engaging people. Our friends at IDS, Dan Meeks, great crew, great furniture, state-of-the-art, high-tech, comfortable, like what you're sitting in. Dan will be glad to show you around. Obviously no pressure. They got some very cool stuff in here. And if you got a few minutes, you might just want to look at it. Just it is really good. It's a good thing to do. Last thing is I'd like to thank Kim Milligan and MEAC Channel 10. They film all this and produce it into DVDs, and it's been a great partnership with us, and it's part of the reason we've been able to go from one trial CEO Cafe to 11. I'd like to introduce Hunter, who's going to make a few comments, and introduce JohnLowry.
Thanks, Roddy. I have two directors here today, Joe Fetterspiel and Ron Corbin. And I'll take it one step further. When Roddy says that we want to get to know the businesses in Nashville, no, we want to bank the businesses in Nashville. We want your loans, we want your deposits, we want your checking accounts, and want you to become customers. We think our dedication to the CEO Cafe demonstrates our commitment to the business community. It's kind of a gift that we give, that we fund every year, and have funded 11 of these. But we think it indicates where we are in the business community, and we hope that resonates with people because there's so much disruption in the financial world today. Bank of Nashville is locally managed, local board, and we're here for the needs of Nashvillians. And so, you know, so goes Nashville, so goes the Bank of Nashville. So, having said that, let me introduce JohnLowry today. John's with Lipscomb University, but he comes to Lipscomb via the SMU Law School. He's done work in California for the California Assembly. He is a specialist in negotiation and conflict resolution. I would say that you were hand-selected here today because you each have so many conflicts and so many issues to resolve, but I wouldn't say that. Actually, what he has to say is applicable at home, at business, when you pump your gas or when you get your car fixed. And this morning's session was great, and I think you'll find out that for somebody 31 years old, he's got a lot of wisdom. So without that, any further ado, John, I turn this credit to you.
Thank you, Hunter. Thank you, Roddy. Thank you to the entire Bank of Nashville for putting on this program. I think it is a wonderful professional development opportunity for the Nashville business community. And I myself, before being a speaker, was a consumer of this and would watch it on television and have seen many of these before. And so thank you to everyone who is a part of this. It is a great service. I am honored to be here. I am honored that each one of you are here. And I want to do some thinking about this process, the process of negotiation. When I say the word negotiation, what comes to mind? Don't think about it. Just give me the first thing that comes to mind. When I say negotiation, what do you think of?
Getting what you want.
Getting what you want, okay?
Two sides.
Two sides, all right?
Compromise.
Compromise. What else?
A battle.
A battle, okay? There's something about this negotiation process, and we know a little bit about it. We've got some expectations about it. There's going to have to be some compromise. It might turn into a battle. There's going to be some communication that takes place with multiple sides. Maybe two, maybe more. But negotiation is something that we do all of the time. Let me give you a definition of negotiation, then I'll ask you to think about all of the different areas in your life where you negotiate. And this definition, I think, encompasses all of what you have said in terms of your initial reactions to the negotiation process. And that is, negotiation is a strategic communication process used to get a deal or to resolve a problem. Negotiation is a strategic communication process to get a deal or to resolve a problem. Now, thinking about that definition of negotiation, thinking about your lives, where do you negotiate?
Everywhere.
Everywhere, don't we? We negotiate at home. This morning I woke up. I have a 3-year-old son named Weston. I woke up this morning, and before I even got to the shower, before I even got dressed, I went into the kitchen to help Weston with breakfast. And so I go into the kitchen, and usually at the Lowry house, we don't have animal crackers for breakfast. But last night, we left the animal crackers out. And so you can imagine what Weston wants for breakfast, can't you? He wants those animal crackers. And so I pulled out a couple, and I handed them to Weston, and he turned around and looked at me and said, "Daddy, I want 5." Now, if you think about that moment, there I was in a negotiation. I gave him 2. He wants 5. He ended up getting 3. All right? He doesn't even know how to say the word negotiation clearly, but he already knows how to do it. There's something that is instinctive about this process of negotiation. Now, many of you serve in many different important roles and businesses in our community. If we were to sit down and I was to ask you what you do, my guess would be is that far down on the list would come, I'm a professional negotiator. I get paid to negotiate. However, the reality of it, especially as we think about that definition, is that's exactly what you are. Many of you get paid to negotiate. Much of what you do is a strategic communication process used to get a deal or to resolve a problem. A graduate student and I at Lipscomb did some research recently. We surveyed, 300 or 400 NCAA Division I college athletic directors. And we gave them the definition I just gave you and said, tell us how much of your time as an athletic director do you spend negotiating? And they came back, and what they reported was that they spent over 50% of their time negotiating. Almost 60% of what they did was negotiate. Now here's what was remarkable, is we asked them how much time, how many of you have spent 1 minute thinking about how to understand that process better, about how to elevate your skills in terms of managing that process, and less than 10% of them had ever spent 1 minute thinking about it. And so the reality is that we negotiate everywhere. And whether we like it or not, we're going to have to be successful negotiators. If we're going to be successful at home, if we're going to be successful in our personal life, but we've got to be successful negotiators to be successful in our professional lives as well. The Latin root for the English word negotiation is the word negotiatus. And that word is defined as to carry on business. The essence of business is this process we call negotiation. And so I want to spend a few minutes and share with you a couple of ideas that I think can be helpful to you as you go out and negotiate. Some of you will negotiate this afternoon. Some of you will negotiate tomorrow. All of us will negotiate because it's part of everything that we do. So go with me, if you would, to Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. I'm going to tell you a story about a negotiation, and what I want you to do is I want you to be thinking about what went wrong with this negotiation. And so after I tell you this story, we're going to talk about what went wrong. Okay? So the scene is Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. We're in the office of Art Rooney, the owner of the Pittsburgh Steelers. The year is 1984. In comes Franco Harris's agent. Now, for those of you who know who Franco Harris was, Hall of Fame running back, had a tremendous career with the Pittsburgh Steelers, won, I think, 3 Super Bowls or something like that. However, the year is 1984. He's at the end of his career, and now all of a sudden, his agent is negotiating a new contract with the Steelers. So there at the table is Art Rooney and his agent. Art Rooney begins the negotiation by taking a piece of paper and by sliding it across the table to Harris's agent. Harris's agent takes the piece of paper, he looks at it, he knows exactly what it is. It's a doctor's report. And it's a medical evaluation of Franco Harris's knee that says that Franco Harris's knee is shot and that he will not survive the rigors of another NFL season. And so Harris's agent pulls out a pen and he writes on the piece of paper a number and slides it back across the desk to Art Rooney. Art Rooney knows the significance of that number immediately. What that number represents is the amount of yards Franco Harris needs to break Jim Brown's all-time rushing record. And they proceed to have a conversation about how wonderful it would be for Franco Harris to break that record in a Pittsburgh Steelers uniform. How great that would be for the Steelers organization. How great it would be for the city of Pittsburgh. And so that sets the stage for this negotiation. And so Art Rooney throws out the first number. And he says, I'm prepared to pay Franco Harris $385,000 to be the running back for the Steelers next year. Now you got to remember, this is 1984, okay? The finances of NFL running backs are a little different today, okay? And so Harris's agent says $385, well, that's not exactly what we had in mind. We were really thinking more like $525. And Rooney says, $525, I think I can do that. And Harris's agent says, well, we're making progress. That's good. That's a good start. Because we were really thinking about $525, but we want that money guaranteed. And so Rooney again says, $525 guaranteed? I can do it. And so the agent again says, well, we're making progress. Because we were really thinking about a second year. And Rooney says, you want a second year on this contract? Fine, I can do that too. So they said, well, you know, we're making progress. But we were really thinking about a second year, not at $525, but a second year at $625. And now Rooney's starting to struggle a little bit, but he says, a second year at $625, I guess I can do that. And Harris's agent again says, well, we're making progress. And so then what he says is, he says, we were really thinking about that second year and having that guaranteed as well. And finally, Art Rooney says, a second year at $625 guaranteed, that's too much to ask. I'm not comfortable with that. Can't do it. And so Harris's agent backtracks and says, well, you know, $625, not guaranteed. I understand it. I think we can do that deal. And Rooney again says, no, I'm not comfortable with that either. And so they start to backtrack. And finally, they backtrack all the way to the point where Harris's agent says, your original offer of $385,000 for next year, unguaranteed, we'll take it. And Rooney says, you know, I'm just not real comfortable with that. And he invites Harris's agent to leave his office. Now, if you know the end of the story, did Franco Harris sign with the Pittsburgh Steelers that year? He did not. He ended up signing with the Seattle Seahawks. And he ended up signing with the Seattle Seahawks for $150,000. And did he break Jim Brown's rushing record?
Nope.
He did not. He finished 192 yards short before he retired. So I ask you, what went wrong with that negotiation?
The agent didn't say yes in time.
Okay? Okay? There were parts of the process that perhaps the agent didn't handle well. The agent didn't say yes. What else?
It went from sort of mutual interest to more about the client.
Okay? Okay, so the focus was off. Whether it be Rooney or whether it be the agent, the focus was off in terms of what they were trying to accomplish. Okay? What else went wrong?
Perceived value was lost.
Okay? Perceived value was lost. In terms of how they looked at this from a substantive standpoint, they weren't exactly accurate. All right, anyone think that this was probably an unsuccessful negotiation? Okay? Well, that's what the Pittsburgh press thought too, for a while. However, as the story goes, the New York Times a couple of weeks later broke the story. And what the New York Times reported was that Art Rooney was a master negotiator, and that Art Rooney got exactly what he wanted out of that negotiation. And so they looked back at it, and of course, hindsight's 20/20. But what they looked at and they said, look at the problem that Rooney had. Franco Harris was a hero in Pittsburgh. And Franco Harris was finished as a running back in the NFL. His knee was shot. And yet, what was the problem that Rooney had?
He didn't want to fire him.
Okay? He couldn't fire him because he didn't want to alienate his fan base, who absolutely loved this guy. And he didn't want to be the one. He didn't want to be the reason that Franco Harris wasn't going to be a Pittsburgh Steeler. Now, what Rooney knew is Rooney knew Harris's agent. He knew he was over-aggressive. He knew that he would continue to ask for more and more and more as long as he said yes. And so he set him up. And he got him to a point where even the most avid Pittsburgh Steelers fan would say, we love Franco Harris, but he's not worth that much. And so you can imagine the press conference the next day when he gets behind the podium and he says, I did everything I could, but I regret to inform you that Harris's agent's demands were just too high and that Franco Harris will no longer be a Pittsburgh Steeler. Now, because Rooney was so good at managing the process, he was able to get exactly what he wanted out of that negotiation. Now, anyone in here ever negotiated an NFL contract? Any of us? Okay? And so how is it then that we're able to think, we're able to analyze about this area of negotiation in which we have no expertise? We're able to do that because the process that's used is the same process that I used with my 3-year-old this morning. It's the same process that Roddy's going to use with his teenage daughter in figuring out how much money to put into her bank account. It's the same process that you all are going to use this afternoon as you carry on your business. See, negotiation is a process. And to be better at negotiation, to be more effective, we need to focus on process, not substance. Abraham Lincoln said, if you give me 8 hours to chop down a tree, I'm going to spend 6 sharpening my axe. He knew something about the importance of process. He knew something about the importance of managing that process. And so the key to effective deals, the key to getting what you want in negotiation, is to focus and to manage the process instead of worrying about the substance. The substance is the question of what is the right answer? What is the right way to solve this problem? What is the right deal to put together here? That's the substance. That's where many people live in negotiation. What I'm suggesting to you is to think about the question of, how do I get there? What is the right answer? But more importantly than that, how do I get to the right answer? And to think about that question, because over here, thinking about process, thinking about this aspect of negotiation, this is where you can improve. This is where you can become a master. This is where you can develop deals that you never imagined before. So the first idea I want to give you is that successful negotiators focus on process, not substance. Now, the first part in terms of managing this process is managing ourselves. And in each of us, we have a natural way to negotiate. All right, let me demonstrate this way. Let's see, I do have a model student, okay? I want everyone to fold their arms just like you had yours, okay? Everyone fold your arms for me, all right? Now here's what I want to ask you to do. I want you to take the arm on the bottom and to put it on top. Okay? How does that feel? Odd? Uncomfortable? Different. Okay? Some of you can't do it. We've got Ron over here who's still trying to figure it out.
I don't understand the process.
All right? He's sitting here going, this is impossible. Why are you asking me to do this, Lowry? You're killing me, man. All right? I was the one that asked him to sit on the front row, too. You know? Well, good deal. All right. You're not alone. You're not alone. Okay? All right. So it feels awkward. It feels uncomfortable. It's not how we want to do it. We want to do it this way. We want to do it the way that's comfortable. The same is true in terms of our negotiating behavior. Some of us are more results-oriented. Some of us are more individually minded. Some of us are more competitive negotiators. Some of us over here are more collectively oriented. Some of us over here are more focused on relationship as opposed to results. We tend to be more cooperative negotiators. And yet, at every moment in the negotiation process, there's a tension where we have to decide, are we going to be competitive or are we going to be cooperative? And that's a tension that we have to deal with. Now, do competitive negotiators get good deals? You bet you they do, because they're firm, because they're aggressive. But what's the risk of being too competitive in negotiation?
Lose, can alienate the...
You can alienate the other side. It's what J. Paul Getty said when he said, if you have to make every dollar that's in a deal, chances are you're not going to have very many deals. Okay? Now, do cooperative negotiators get good deals? You bet you they do, because they think about how can we bring value to everyone. And oftentimes they're able to get good deals, but what do cooperative negotiators have to be very careful of? Finding themselves at a table with a competitive negotiator. Because you put a competitive negotiator and a cooperative negotiator together, who's going to win? The competitive negotiator. And so the person that's going to get the best deal is the person who can do this. The person who's willing to go outside their comfort zone. The person who's not going to make decisions in negotiation based on their unconscious habits and what's comfortable for them, but the person who's going to make decisions based on strategy and what makes sense in terms of the process. It's the person who can put their arms either way. That's the person who is positioned. That's the person that's equipped. The person who can be competitive when it makes sense. The person who can be cooperative when it makes sense. That's the person that's going to do the best in terms of great negotiated outcomes. And so the second point is that successful negotiators know how to manage mixed motives. The mixed motives of, do I compete or do I cooperate? Let me give you the anatomy of a negotiation. Usually a negotiation starts with an issue. There's some issue that we have to negotiate. If it's part of a business deal, it might be the terms of a loan agreement. If it's resolving a problem, it might be what to do about the slip and fall, and how much is that claim worth. All right? There's an issue there, and it's an issue that has to be resolved before the negotiating is done, before there's a deal struck. And parties, what they do is they take different positions on issues. Sometimes it works out to where those positions are the same, and in that case, you can go to Starbucks and enjoy life. But the reality is, as you know, is that many times those positions aren't the same. And so what happens is you have the issue, you have two different positions on the issue, and what has to happen is one of two things. Either a party has to concede the issue and say that the other side is right. How often does that happen? Not often. Or the parties have to start giving up what they want until hopefully they get to a point where they can agree and at least be satisfied. Not thrilled, but satisfied. Okay? If they're able to do that, that's where they'll leave. If they're not able to do that, what usually happens is you have no deal, and in many cases you have no relationship. That's not a good option either. And so the question is there another way? Is there a way to change this negotiating paradigm that we live in? And that way is to go below the line. Those are the four most important words I'm going to share with you today, is go below the line. Now you think about what's below the line. What is below the line are what we call interests. These are things that are very intangible, things that are not concrete, things that can't be divided, can't be negotiated, yet things that are very real to the parties involved, things that drive people to take the positions that they take. These are things like ego and motives and goals and relationships and values and principles. Some of these things that you can't negotiate, but some of these things that you have to deal with. And so once you get down to the interest level, once you're able to uncover what those interests are, all of a sudden then you have what you need to be creative. And you have the ability to change the conversation. Because now all of a sudden, instead of sitting across the table from someone where you're hammering back and forth at each other, all of a sudden you're able to sit on the same side of the table. You're able to look at your interest, and you're able to look at the problem and work together trying to find a way to solve the problem in a way that satisfies both of your interests. You see, oftentimes positions clash, but interests don't. And if you're able to work at the interest level, you have a lot more power to be creative and to come up with solutions that are very, very useful to you. Let me illustrate by introducing you to my friend Brian Tucker. Spoke to him on the telephone last night. Brian Tucker and I went to Wheaton College. He graduated and went to work for Charles Schwab as a wealth manager in Palm Springs, California. He had some clients who came in one day and said, you know, we've got some money to invest, and we want to invest in some sort of luxury golf community. And so Tucker got involved in this project, and before he knew it, he got more and more involved, until one day he was looking for property in which they might do this luxurious golf resort and community. And he did something that really is quite simple. He went on Google Earth, and he looked around the United States. There wasn't a great spot in the United States, so he went on Google Earth and went down the Baja coast of Mexico, looking for a tract of land that he could do and help these gentlemen out with a luxurious golf resort and community. He found a peninsula just south of Ensenada, Mexico, that he thought would be an ideal place for it. So sure enough, he travels down to Mexico and he finds the landowner, who's an 83-year-old man who lives in Ensenada. He goes to the landowner and he has a conversation about purchasing the land. makes a very generous offer for the land, and the landowner says, absolutely not, the land's not for sale. And so sure enough, he goes back, and him and his partners discuss it, and so he goes, has another meeting with the landowner, and he brings a little bit more money. And the landowner has the same response. It says, absolutely not, the land is not for sale. And so Tucker began asking some questions about this gentleman's interests. He began asking questions like, what do you intend to do with the land? What do you want to get out of the land? You're 83 years old. What do you want to do before your life's over? And what he heard from the gentleman was this. He said, that land is the legacy that I will leave to my family and to the city of Ensenada. That land is an appreciating asset, and I'm going to wait as long as I can before I sell it, and that will be the legacy that I leave. And so Tucker heard legacy, family, make an impact on the city of Ensenada. Below the line stuff, intangible kind of stuff. And so he began going to birthday parties. He began getting to know this gentleman's family, going to all the weddings, developing relationship. Finally, he went back to this gentleman with a proposal and said, I'm not going to ask you to sell the land. Your position's clear on that. But I do want to propose having you be a partner with us in a joint venture in which you'll contribute the land, in which we think we can generate a ton of revenue that will significantly increase what you would receive for that land if you just sold it, that will provide for the economic security of your family, that will enable you to make an economic impact on the city of Ensenada. And he threw in some other things too, talking about all of the jobs that would be created by this coming to Ensenada. And all of the different things that this gentleman was so passionate about. It didn't take long before the gentleman said, you betcha, that's something I can be a part of. I'll contribute the land. And so from there, the rest of the story is this. Tucker started to talk to golf course designers. And he had Jack Nicklaus and Greg Norman, Tom Fazio, Tom Watson, all come down and look at this piece of land that's surrounded on three sides by the Pacific Ocean. It's a 400-acre plateau that has a 2,500-foot mountain that sits between it and the city of Ensenada. And so they all came down and they said, it's our estimation that this is the most beautiful place to develop a golf course on earth. We'll do it for free. All of them said that. And so before Tucker made a decision on which one to use, two of Fazio's designers left and went to a brand new design firm called Tiger Woods Design. And they go over and they talk to Tiger and they say, Tiger, this is your next course. This is where you got to go design your next course. So sure enough, Tiger goes down there, checks it out, and agreed that this would be the third golf course that he will design, behind the one that he's working on in North Carolina and the one that he's working on in Dubai. And so sure enough now, the whole nature of this particular deal has changed, having Tiger involved. Now all of a sudden this landowner, the legacy that he's going to leave, is not millions, is not tens of millions, but is hundreds of millions in terms of what his take will be from this whole venture. So all of a sudden, it was a 30-year-old kid who was able to do something that no other business person was able to do. Over 50 people had been to see this landowner about buying that land, offered him millions of dollars. He said no to every single one of them. But because Tucker went below the line, because Tucker understood that it was interest that was driving this whole thing, because Tucker connected with those interests, all of a sudden now, we're going to have a golf resort that goes in, that Tiger Woods is going to design, and the legacy that this gentleman is going to leave his community and his family is far beyond anything he ever imagined. So you see there, when we get below the line, all of a sudden, we have extraordinary power. Because instead of being the negotiation adversary, we now are in position to become the hero. Because if we can connect to someone's interest, we can create solutions that perhaps they've never thought about before, but solutions that in fact meet their interest in a way that they never imagined. So, my final point is this. Successful negotiators go below the line. Successful negotiators focus on finding out and responding to interest, not positions. And so as I leave you, let me just remind you, successful negotiators focus on process. Successful negotiators manage mixed motives. Successful negotiators go below the line. Jim?
Now, questions or observations or anything from your experience you agree with, disagree with, any suggestions? Or Ron, you've been in the insurance business. Does that resonate with any experiences you've had or any questions you have?
Yeah, it's how you get to yes, but how did you not win with your son? He wanted
He got up to 3.
Well, but it started with 2. We were planning on doing that, and then it got to 3.
Now's the tough negotiation.
Yeah, I tell you.
Let's get to the heart of the tough one.
I could have asserted my power as dad, but by doing that and by being competitive that way, I would then have a moment on my hands that I would have to manage. And frankly, I was kind of late getting here and didn't have time to manage the moment. And so I just gave them a third one.
It's worth an extra cookie.
Yeah.
Stuart?
Is there value, and maybe going back to the Rooney example, is there value in knowing what you want before you go in, or is that an impediment, or can that be a handicap, and you end up limiting yourself? There were 2 roles there. As I'm listening to that story, I'm thinking, gosh, if that agent had just known what he wanted and said, fine, that's enough, instead of being the type that he was, he might have walked out with a signed deal. Maybe not, but...
Yeah. I mean, I think as far as competitive negotiation is concerned, it's critically important that you think first about where you want to end. Because by thinking about where you want to end, then the next question is, where do you want to begin that will position you to end there? And so if we had more time, I'd talk about competitive negotiation. The most important move is the very first move. That move will dictate where you end. And so you need to think about where you want to end, and then immediately you have to think about where do you want to begin, because that's the number one thing that will position you to end where you want to end. But you've got to be flexible, because about 80% of negotiations are going to have both competitive and cooperative elements. And sometimes on the cooperative side, when you get down to the interest level, all of a sudden you learn lots of things that completely change your outlook on the deal, or the opportunities that exist in the deal, or ways to resolve the problem, whatever the case might be. And so you've got to be flexible enough to be opportunistic, to where if you see something there that you didn't think about before, you're able to respond to it in a way that creates value for both sides. And so I think you're exactly right in saying you've got to think about it ahead of time, but you've got to be flexible enough along the way to adjust your strategy depending on how the process plays out.
Other questions? Brian, you and John do a lot of negotiation with your Chief Information Officer and Chief Operating Officer, so between the 2 of you, you're doing a lot of manpower management and a lot of information. But all that involves negotiations. Any of this sound right or sound wrong, or any questions come to your mind?
It's right on target, yeah, that every day. I was thinking of things this morning that it fits into.
And does it sound right there's usually 2 reasons, the noble reason people give and the real reason there? So you have to kind of go below the line to find. Does that sound right to you, John?
Yes.
Somebody had their hand over here.
When do you go below the line? In other words, you need to think about that prior to the negotiation. Try to do some intelligence, I presume, to prepare you for that adversarial conversation beforehand, so you'll know where to probe or what.
Well, as I said, you've got to be prepared to be competitive if you need to be competitive. You've got to be prepared to be cooperative if you need to be cooperative. And so as you think about when, it might be something that you explore early on in a negotiation to see if that's an option. in terms of exploring and taking that perspective on how to deal with this problem or put this deal together. And if you can create a relationship and you can create a conversation very early on that embraces and that uses all that's going on below the line, you're going to be in a much better position. The truth of the matter is, sometimes you can't. And sometimes the other side, they want to be purely competitive. They don't want to talk about interest. That doesn't mean they don't have them, they just don't want to talk about them. And so there are times where you got to be somewhat competitive, but oftentimes there's a moment where you're going to hit impasse, where your reservation point and their reservation point, it doesn't match. And so the only thing to do there is to either cave in more or to walk away from the table, or then at that moment, when you hit impasse, revisit this below the line discussion. Because at competitive negotiation, what you're doing is you're claiming value. You're dividing a fixed pie. But over here in cooperative negotiation and thinking about below the line, the opportunity here is that if you ask the right questions, if you get the right information, you can actually make the pie bigger, which means you don't have to have as much from a percentage standpoint to actually get more. And so oftentimes if you get to a point where you simply can't divide it, you might have to have a discussion about how can we create some value for each of us? How can we make the pie bigger so that we can then divide it in such a way that it makes sense for both of us? So again, the answer is it depends, which is the answer in a lot of negotiation. Whereas you've got to just think about this as something that is part of the process and be looking for the right time to use this tool.
I guess I was thinking more in terms of prior to the negotiation, understanding and probing and doing some research on your, on your adversary to try to determine in advance what those interests may be, just so you know what to probe or what to throw out. I presume that's something you'd recommend that people do.
Well, it's a great piece of the preparation, but it's important that you don't make assumptions about the interest. Because if you're wrong about interest in terms of what you assume, then all of a sudden you're responding to something that may not be a driving factor at all. And so even if you do your due diligence and learn about the person that you're going to be negotiating with, it's important to have the conversation and confirm what you've learned. Because by doing that, then you know you're on track in terms of trying to figure out how to satisfy their interest in the most productive way possible.
Other questions? Yes.
John, I had a small business that we sold some time ago, and somebody was representing us. And his contention was you never make the first offer, because he always said, who makes the first offer loses. Could you speak to that?
Okay. Well, let me put on my lawyer hat and argue with that a little bit, okay? Because that is traditional wisdom in terms of thinking about making the first offer. However, if we had more time, we'd do a negotiation, and what you'd find is that there is a gravitational pull towards the first number that goes on the table in a competitive negotiation. And so I work with a lot of insurance clients. And the traditional wisdom in the insurance industry is you let the claimant make a demand. Now, I push back on that a little bit because when the claimant makes a demand, all of a sudden that demand has a psychological and influential impact on someone's value of the case. So the question is, do you want to be the one that has that impact, or do you want to be the one that's impacted? My argument would be, you want to be the one that has that impact. And so by making the opening offer, what you do is you manage the other side's expectations. And so I did a lot of personal injury kind of stuff. And the way I described it is I said, I don't want the claimant looking at lake property. I want the claimant looking at a new lawnmower. Okay? And so if you let the plaintiff's attorney come in and make the $1 million claim, the $1 million demand, then all of a sudden you have a claimant who's thinking, they're anchoring to $1 million. Now, that might only be worth $20,000. But now you've got a problem because what they've anchored to is the $1 million. Those expectations have been set, and so it's harder to get that resolved. If you come in and let's say it is worth $20,000 and you make an offer of $3,500, then all of a sudden that same claimant is anchoring towards your $3,500. Now 20 grand compared to 3,500 looks really good. 20 grand compared to $1 million looks awful. And so there is some profound influence that can be had with the very first number that goes on the table. And I would argue that it makes sense for you to take the ball and to put that number on the table, to claim that psychological win, to manage those expectations. That's how I recommend that clients do it. But that is totally against conventional wisdom. I fully recognize that.
I think one of the best negotiation things, and everybody in this room can relate to it, is buying a car. I, in my past, have been around the car business for a long time and know more than I want to know about the car business, but you want to really get into negotiation, as everybody probably can attest, to go to buy a car.
Yeah.
That's when you really have your skills challenged. And
you bet. And now there's car companies that know that Americans hate the process. You know, how many people like buying a car? Not many of us, right? And so there's companies like Saturn and CarMax who say, we'll make it hassle-free. We won't make you go through the dance. We'll just set the price, and you can decide if you want to pay that or not. All right? What's so fascinating to me, though, is it's these same people who hate the process. They get on a cruise ship and they go down to the Caribbean, and they get off that cruise ship, and there's usually a street full of vendors, right? And they get off that cruise ship, and they're in one of the most beautiful places on earth, and they never see it. You know why they don't see it? Because they spend the entire day doing what they say they hate. They spend the entire day haggling over T-shirts and umbrellas and things they don't need. And they come back on the cruise ship that night, and they say, check out these T-shirts. He wanted 12 bucks each for them. You know how much I bought them for? I got 3 for 18. And they're so proud of it. And so you're right. We hate buying cars, when in reality, we go on vacation, we get in a different environment, and we love the negotiation process. It's a lot of fun. And each of us as business people, we get to do it every single day. We get the opportunity to have this fun every single day in terms of managing this process, to see what we can come up with by managing it well.
John, is it your story of the golf?
Yeah.
Actually the football NFL contract.
Okay.
Of negotiating, and when somebody accepts, there's a second negotiation. Is that, though, a valid tactic of, once you get one yes, that there's another negotiation that then you initiate? Or I mean, I've heard that before as a valid negotiating tactic.
Well, it's part of managing the process. I mean, you take a negotiation that has a wide variety of issues. Sometimes you want to deal with those issues individually. Sometimes you want to go yes, 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 and by the time you get to the 5th yes and deal with all the issues, you're done. However, sometimes it makes more sense to link those issues together, because you have different pools of value that come into play here. And sometimes you can be more flexible on one and less flexible on the other. So for example, you know, perhaps in that negotiation, just hypothetically speaking, perhaps Mr. Rooney was able to be more flexible in terms of the compensation level of Franco Harris, but he wasn't willing to be more flexible with regard to time. There's ways in which you can link those together to where you can get value and you can win in terms of those issues that are more important to you, and then you can sacrifice a little here and put some deals together that would not get done if you just handled them in a list format one at a time.
Painting the picture of the win-win picture out here before the negotiation begins, how valid and how significant is that?
Well, you'll really see if you read negotiation books, or if you look at some of our competitors in the industry in terms of training people how to negotiate, usually you see these folks in one camp or the other. You go down to Borders right over here, and you're going to see some books that very clearly are competitive negotiation books. How to negotiate anyone, or how to out-negotiate anyone. Start with no. Some of those kind of books, those teach you how to be a very competitive negotiator. And then there's other books over here that talk about the win-win approach, getting to yes, getting past no. These are books that are focused more on the collaborative side of things. What I recommend is you've got to be able to do both and to do both well. Because sometimes the other side's not looking for a win-win. The other side's looking for a win-lose. And they're looking for you to be the one that loses. And in those situations, you sometimes don't want to think win-win. You need to match them and think win-lose and be competitive with them, or else you're going to end up with the short end of the stick. And so you've got to be able to do both, but win-win negotiation, that's this interest-based negotiation. It can be very, very valuable, but it's got to be appropriate in terms of the nature of the game that you're playing.
Any other questions? Yes.
John, can you talk a little bit about managing the other side's expectations? I'm in commercial real estate. A lot of times when we're making offers on properties, I've got some comps to back it up.
Okay.
I've got some sales that I can say this based on these comps, this is what your property's worth. Their expectations may be off about 50% of that, so how can we manage their expectations?
Okay. Well, it's really interesting in terms of, you've heard the analogy of negotiation as a dance. And it kind of reflects the give and take that takes place in negotiation. However, who is it that sets the size of the dance floor? It's you that sets the size of the dance floor, depending on how aggressive you're willing to be in terms of whatever the opening number is. All right? And so if you're in a situation where the other side is way off, you know about what the value of that property is, then you don't want to start very close to the value of that property because you're going to find yourself stuck pretty quick. All right? What you want to do is set a big enough dance floor that you can work through the process and end somewhere where you want to end. And so as far as the opening move, that's why I say it's the most important move, because it will set the expectations. It will set the size of the dance floor. And you want to be very strategic about that. And in terms of the way that you make the opening offer, that's very important too. If for whatever reason, I know you talked about getting involved in a lot of foreclosures, and sometimes time is sensitive with respect to that. And if that's the case where you have to be more reasonable because of time, you want to be sure to communicate the nature of your offer, that it's a more reasonable offer, that you don't have a lot of room to dance, that you don't have much to negotiate with, so that you then clearly set their expectations. Okay, this is where they're at, and I understand the way that they're managing this process, because that will help dictate in terms of how they respond.
Good job. Thank you to Roddy and Hunter in the Bank of Nashville for making this possible. Thank you for all of you for being here. If you've never seen IDS, as I've said before, I always thought a chair was a chair, but the ergonomics and the philosophy and the psychology and the productivity increase that goes into arranging an office and selecting certain furniture. If you've never toured upstairs, you ought to do that. We've got a VIP tour about to start in just a minute. But thank you again for being here. I hope you win all your negotiations. Thank you.
you.